Ready whenever you are.
We're ready if you're ready.
I think we're both ready. Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Emma Zabayos. I'm an analyst for Terbium Labs, which is a dark web data monitoring company, and I'm here to talk to you about shopping on the dark web. A little bit of guidance because I go on the dark web and look at multi-good marketplaces as part of my job. Before we launch into exactly how easy it is to buy things on the dark web, I do have one reminder. Don't do any of this. It doesn't matter who tells you, whether it's someone you met on Reddit or someone who's speaking to you at a conference, buying illegal goods on the dark web is a crime, and people do go to jail for it. So please do not actually do any of this. My boss required that the slide go in multiple times. Before we get into how to buy things on the dark web, I want to quickly establish what the dark web actually is. When we think about the World Wide Web, that actually has several subsections to it. We have the clear web, or the surface web, some people call it that, which is what we use to browse every day. And it's anything that's indexed by a search engine like Google. So basically, if you can go and say, I want to see coffee filters or a new coffee machine, and it will just show you a bunch of pages. You don't have to remember what's the exact site that I'm looking for. That's going to be on the clear web. The flip side of that is the deep web. The deep web is anything that's not indexed by Google. That doesn't necessarily mean it's nefarious in any way, because that can contain things like intranets, like private databases that you need a password to access. And it also contains, as a subset inside that, the dark web. The dark web does require a special software or browser of some kind. It can, but it basically, and it also isn't necessarily nefarious. It just means that it is more privacy focused, and it's not indexed by Google. When I talk about the dark web, I'm going to be talking about Tor, the Onion router, because that's the network where most of these multi-good marketplaces that I personally am interested are hosted. So what can you find on the dark web? The short answer is pretty much everything, honestly, for good or for bad. The longer answer is that there are a lot of different sort of groups of things you can find. The dark web is primarily known for its drug marketplaces, but there's also things like fraud materials, like payment cards, or full ID theft materials. There's also weapons, although usually not the kind that you're thinking of. It's much more easy to find, say, a taser or some mace or some brass knuckles than it is to find a bomb or a gun. There's also things like they're just listed there because presumably they want to list them somewhere. So I have seen things like Yankee Candle gift sets, things like books, things like just random, here's some underwear fresh out of the box. And then also, I'm going to get to this later, but I have seen a human skull listed on the dark web. So let's put on some smooth jazz from the Deep Web Radio, and let's browse a little bit. How do you buy things on the clear web? Well, when I'm looking for something, I might go to a website. First, I need to know which website I'm looking at. Let's say it's Amazon, a multi-good marketplace that has a lot of different things. You have to know what you're looking for. Let's say I'm looking for a pour-over filter for coffee because my French press broke. And then you have to know what's important to you about that purchase. What are you looking for? Are you looking for something you're not sure about the purchase, so you're interested in something like a warranty? If you're thinking, oh, I might want to have many of these, so I want to find a vendor that I trust. So all these things are basically the same about the dark web. If you can buy something on the clear web, you can buy it on the dark web. The skills are pretty much interchangeable with a few tweaks. So the first thing that you would do is try and figure out where you want to go. So in the absence of something like, because the dark web isn't indexed, you can't just say, bring me all the coffee filters that I'm looking for. There's no way to do that. There's no search engine. So you have to find another way to get suggestions on what you're trying to look for. Something like a marketplace forum, something like going on Reddit, which used to have a thriving forum of suggestions for places that you could look to buy things. Dread, which is another spin-off forum. Or if you have a friend who is already buying things on the dark web, you could ask them, where should I look to buy something? They will probably direct you to a marketplace. So I've listed a couple of these. The ones crossed out are no longer active because they've been taken down, but there are still multi-good marketplaces on the dark web, and those, again, are the ones I'm primarily going to be talking about. Once you get to a marketplace, you can search, type in exactly what you want. You can peruse listings. You can check ratings and prices, which is important to you because you're a savvy shopper. You can do some comparison shopping. You'll have to go to actual different marketplaces to be able to comparison shop, but if you're really interested in finding the best possible price, you're probably going to do that. You can add to cart, and then you just check out. The main difference in that whole process is that you're going to be checking out using Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency and not just entering your credit card information. So I'm going to show you an example here. This example is Dream Market, currently the biggest marketplace on the dark web. And you might kind of think of it as, it looks a little bit like we've stepped back in time. This looks like Amazon in like 2004 or something. It's trying to completely replicate the e-commerce experience of the clear web on the dark web. So you can see that I've blurred out my username, but you can see that there's different categories on the left-hand side, that there's a search bar. You can look for a specific search term, that there's filters you can apply to your purchase, and a number of different pages that you can scroll through. But you can also see the listings that come up they'll show you exactly what price you're going to pay for it. They'll show you who is going to sell it to you and their rating on the site. You can see the little star next to their name, where it will ship, and also a picture and a title. Now you can see the rating on the left has those little stars on it. That's because everyone on the dark web is trying to get your attention and trying to get you to buy the goods from them. So in the absence of a lot of the more sophisticated e-commerce tools that we're used to on the clear web, what they use to grab your attention is a lot of like little stars and little sparklies and like using kind of fun font things, because they're just trying to get you to click on their listing. They're trying to get you to remember them. So zooming in on a listing, this one is for Bank of America checking accounts. And so you can see that they're trying to get you, here's a very clear description of what we're selling. Here's the vendor with the number of stars. And here is obviously a picture just saying, like, this is what you're going to get. This is a recognizable brand that you might be looking for. So you may be wondering, okay, why would what other information, sorry, the mic got really hot for a second. What else is interesting about this listing? I'm zooming in on the actual text attached to the listing itself. Again, you can see that they're really trying to grab your eye with this fancy word art. But then also you can see they're trying to really court your business, your user, like your allegiance to their product. In the absence of things like a recommendations engine or any sort of e-commerce or other sort of more sophisticated e-commerce tools, the dark web is built on reputation and buyer loyalty. They're always trying to court the most committed e-commerce experience from their buyers, and so they'll offer things like and so they're trying to establish trust between the buyer and the vendor. How do you do this? You do this by offering warranties and by basically offering programs that will make the buyer buy from you. So you can see that, sorry, I'm trying to read the thing because I can't really see it on my screen. Oh, which one is this? Oh, you can see that they're offering 100% satisfaction guarantees and warranties. The vendors are really looking for buyers to be satisfied up until the point where they decide that you're trying to scam them, and then they will turn on you viciously. But basically, up until the point that they decide that you're a scammer, they will do pretty much anything to keep your business. The only way that they can remain on top of the dark web selling pool is by offering the best possible policies. A lot of these goods are functionally interchangeable. Buying a checking account from one person is essentially the same as buying it from another person. What they're bidding on is their ability to satisfy you as a customer. And so that's where these things like 100% satisfaction guarantees come in, things like warranties come in. And so then once you can really basically shop around and find a vendor who is going to give you the best possible deal. How many of you have ever left a rating or review on a marketplace like Amazon. You can do that on the dark web too. In fact, people will give really good rewards if you leave a rating or review on the dark web. And I want to point out one thing that's also really important about the dark web e-commerce experience. If you see, look at that really long review on the bottom. There's, oh no, sorry, the one below it. Knew him from AB and has never disappointment. Not grammatically correct. Try him out. This person has followed this vendor from Alphabay, a marketplace that has been offline since the FBI took it down for over a year. This kind of reputation and this kind of buyer-vendor relationship goes from site to site. It's continuous despite the takedowns that affect the dark web. Ratings and reviews are incredibly important for establishing a vendor's reputation and trust. And using ratings and reviews really establishes, like, this is a person who's not going to try and scam you, this is a person who delivers, and it illustrates really the resiliency of the dark web marketplace. Sorry, that's kind of an aside, but this is an example of really, like, this marketplace is independent of the actual markets themselves. These vendors and buyers have independent relationships, which makes it really hard to just destroy that by taking down a marketplace. I put together, you notice I've been talking a lot about digital goods. You might have been expecting me to talk more about, like, here's where meth is, here's how you can buy cocaine. But I really am talking about digital goods, not just because that's what I'm interested in professionally, like we're a dark web data monitoring company, but also because digital goods are a lot more dangerous to us as cybersecurity and security researchers. For a physical good, like if you're buying some drugs on the internet or someone's buying some drugs, then there are some time, cost, and duplication sort of limitations there. If you're buying something that has to be physically shipped to you, you have to wait for it. If you're buying a digital good, it arrives instantaneously. If you're buying something like, it turns out drugs are very expensive. However, digital goods, you can get those some of them for $2 or less. There's a much lower barrier to entry to starting buying digital goods. And then also with duplication, you can only, any physical good is essentially single use. You can't effectively duplicate it on your own. A digital good can be replicated as many times as you want. And with some things like buying a guide or a template, in fact, the duplication is the point. Even with something like a payment card or a fake ID or some identity documents like a full identity pack, you can duplicate those multiple times. That's incredibly dangerous for us as people who are trying to combat these marketplaces. The move from buying physical goods on the dark web to digital goods really shows that this is an entry point into a larger arena of crime. I'm also going to zoom in a little bit on digital goods. This is something that I found on the dark web last year. This is someone selling full identity packs for infants. Basically, okay, this is someone buying full identity packs for infants. This is an incredibly specialized product that someone's just started selling. And the reason why they're selling this is because you can use it for tax fraud. You can take these identity packs for infants and you can fraudulently claim a child tax credit. You can impersonate that child's identity and then use it to create synthetic identities. There's a huge marketplace for this kind of fraud material on the dark web, and that marketplace is only growing. There's also stuff I'm not even talking about cybercrime tools, but there's the move from physical goods in the form of drugs to digital goods in the form of fraud and cybercrime tools should concern us as an industry. It's an entry point for a lot more people to get into criminal enterprises in a way that's very difficult for us to track. But having shown you guys exactly how easy it is to buy things on the dark web, I do want to emphasize that things can go wrong. Scams, like I talked about before, are rampant. People on the dark web need to trust each other, but they often really, really don't. So you'll see buyers scamming vendors, vendors scamming buyers. It's entirely possible to get ripped off, especially if you're buying something digitally, and there's really there can be like a very difficult way to get recourse. If you're being scammed by someone, if you go to Amazon and buy something and you're scammed, then there's a lot of places where you can go to contest that. You can go to Amazon, you can go to the Better Business Bureau, you can go pursue legal resources if they take enough money from you. If you're scammed by someone on the dark web, who are you going to complain to? You might go flame them on a forum. That's essentially the lengths you can go. Also, I do want to emphasize again, you can go to jail for this. So there is this huge risk about buying things on the dark web, although it is substantially less if you're buying digital goods, because law enforcement isn't pursuing that as heavily. They pursue the purchase of drugs and weapons far more. I'm going to take questions at the end. I also want to talk a little bit about what you can't buy on the dark web. If you see any of these, they are almost definitely scams. Doesn't mean that it never exists, but the amount that people talk about it is far disproportionate to the amount that actually happens. This is an ISIS Bitcoin wallet, or that's what people thought it was until it was revealed that it was a scam that someone had set up in order to collect money from the gullible. The FBI actually took down this Bitcoin wallet and left up ISIS's actual Bitcoin wallet on the dark web. Generally, just to talk a quick digression about terrorism on the dark web, there is a terrorist presence on the dark web. However, it's a lot less than a lot of people think it is, because generally terrorism either benefits from being out in the open, like on Twitter, where a lot of people can see the conversations you're having, or very, very private coordination, like on Signal or Telegram. Being on the dark web in sort of a quasi-public forum that's very, very difficult to access, it doesn't actually serve their interests particularly well. Most of the ISIS presence on the dark web is not. In fact, ISIS, it is people on the dark web who are weird and trying to impersonate ISIS. Also, you may have seen this in the news. This is a site that was set up for an organization called Besa Mafia. It was an Albanian mob organization that said, we will kill people for you if you give us Bitcoin and tell us who they are. This got a lot of publicity. A lot of people were very concerned about this. It was a scam. They took about 100 Bitcoin over 6 months. They closed the site, having never hurt anyone, and they forwarded the information about who had been asked to be killed to the FBI, which is kind of a chaotic good sort of thing to do, I think. They basically were like, hey, we've heard that someone wants to kill this person. You should probably protect them. Also, we took their money. So yeah, murder for hire schemes really aren't effectively happening on the dark web, though this is probably my favorite example of anything happening on the dark web ever. Now, before we wrap up, I want to get into some sort of just fun stuff that we've seen. Not that the dark web can't be fun, but a lot of it is just crime, and that's not very fun to look at. So here, starting with some pretty basic things. Even if crime's not for you, don't worry. There are a lot of hobbies you can pick up from the dark web. I'm not sure who posts these. They might be like trying to stealth get people on the dark web to like turn away from their criminal ways and get into modular origami. Or maybe they're just listing stuff because they're like, I have it in my house. Maybe someone will buy it. There are also a lot of people trying to sell movies as if there's not lots and lots of places where you can steal movies much more easily. But theoretically, you could buy Disney movies or some Star Wars. Oh, yeah. I love this. A lot of people are selling points for different accounts and things. So Sephora is a pretty interesting example. I don't think most people on the dark web are really actively using Sephora, but you can buy Sephora points if you're interested in them. This was a really great shop that was set up for a long time. They sold under 21 fake IDs so that you could get age-related discounts. Apparently they were really popular. This one's a little bit cheesy. This is from way, way back during Silk Road, which is why the format looks different. And we think it might have just been someone being like, I don't know what to post here, but I guess I'll sell you some grilled cheese if you want it. Also, look at given the Bitcoin fluctuation, this would be very expensive now. There are a lot of phishing guides on the dark web, ways to teach you how to phish different email addresses. We also found this phishing guide. Also, someone actually sold this under the title like fishing with a PH, and then we bought it for research purposes and opened it, and it was this, which is great. They got us. I don't know if this person ever got their Hamilton tickets, but I like that they were really trying every possible avenue to get them. Also, so this is a listing that someone at my company found, but someone was listing actual animals on the dark web with the hopes that someone would buy them and be able to engage in this trade. Apparently, there is actually a growing like a wild sort of protected animal trade and also antiquities trade on the dark web. This was sort of way at the forefront. I think this was from Alphabet. But yeah, don't do this. Don't buy animals on the dark web. Go to a shelter or something. Again, and just really reiterating, don't do any of this. Please don't buy things on the dark web. I know I showed you it can be really easy, but that's really the point. It's really dangerous that things have gotten so easy to buy on the dark web. This is an entry point for people who are engaged in maybe either going on the dark web because they're interested in it or think it would be kind of fun or like weird to see what's out there, or maybe buying narcotics for personal use or something. This is a really easy avenue for them to get into much more hardcore cybercrime or into fraud. And we should really be worried about that as a society. That's really a growing area of danger for us. So not to be like, oh, here's some really fun stuff and here's like a really serious message, but like this is serious. I think it's something that we should all be concerned about as an industry. Anyway, I said I would show you the human skull. This is something I found last year. It is also one of my favorite things. This is just someone listing a human skull really beautifully displayed on a bed of tentacles. And then also the only product description they gave was a dictionary definition of a skull, which I find fascinating. So I hope that this talk was enjoyable or funny or at least interesting. Feel free to follow up with me afterwards. I'll also take questions now, and you can also follow up with me on Twitter or something.
Yes, it's neat to see the difference between, you're trying to build trust with consumers while still remaining anonymous. So you're building a reputation and also an anonymity in order to develop it.
Yeah, it's kind of a pseudo-anonymity because like a lot of these, actually some of these marketplaces, I should have zoomed in on this more, they will actually show like this is the same vendor that you remember from a previous marketplace. And people will become very attached to identities and screen names. So it is sort of the pseudo-anonymity where like I don't know who you are in real life, but I do know your reputation on this marketplace, because having absolutely no reputation like it's just not sustainable. There needs to be some degree of trust and of reputation in order for these transactions to take place. Yeah.
Given what you just said, have you seen any evidence that people are actually sharing vendor names or like passing them around, like being Dread Pirate Roberts from The Princess Bride?
Oh, okay, I see what you mean. You're saying like people who are impersonating other vendors or who are like sort of trading a title. I haven't seen people trading a title. People do try to impersonate other vendors, usually not for very long, because it's really sort of a smash and grab, like I'm gonna set up a marketplace, I'm gonna set up a shop under your name, hope that people fall for it, and then run away with their money. You can't really sustain that long term, unless you actually just want to do a good job, I guess. I mean, but I think most people who are doing that aren't really interested in doing a good job.
So buying drugs and stuff is very illegal?
Yeah.
But if I was going to buy Sephora points, is that like more gray market area or?
Okay, so that's still illegal. You're still buying, because basically they're selling you someone's account, and so then, which presumably you don't have permission to access. I think the main difference is honestly that people aren't as interested in prosecuting some of this fraud, which is in itself a problem, but like the FBI is very interested, like the Justice Department are a lot more interested in prosecuting drug trade. So it's not necessarily degrees of illegality, it's degrees of willingness to prosecute and follow up at this point. Sorry, I think you had your hand up first. I'm gonna try and get to everyone.
Who is the primary kind of customer of Terbium, and how, I would assume based on this talk that government agencies you mostly sell to, but do you also sell to corporate, and what interest do they have in kind of in data on these sales?
We actually primarily sell to companies. The government really has dark web monitoring kind of in its own hand, I think. But then we primarily sell to companies. There's a lot of data exposure on the dark web, and we do, and we basically look and see and identify where data is, like, and then let companies know that we found it. I'm happy to talk more about what my company specifically does afterwards.
I have maybe a silly question. Can I buy a candle set on the dark web and it not be illegal? And if it is illegal, why is that illegal?
I don't. Okay, I'm not a lawyer, and I feel uncomfortable answering this. I think if you went on a marketplace and just bought something that was legal, the worst would be get swept up, and like people would assume that like, oh, since you're here, you're doing something illegal. I would say that if you're buying a candle set or something that is explicitly not illegal, you are unlikely to be prosecuted if the site is ever busted. You in the back have been waiting. Both of you. Decide which one of you gets to go first. Oh, wait for the mic.
I'm really surprised you didn't talk about multi-sig sales. I mean, that's how you protect yourself on the in buying on the dark web. Can you talk about that?
Do you mean marketplaces where you have to have 3 people basically sign off? Yeah, that is a level of protection. I was trying to give sort of a surface level overview, but there are ways to protect yourself while making transactions on the dark web. I don't want to say that there isn't.
It seems like over the years it's been sort of all the same things that you can buy. Not a lot has changed. Maybe that's my ignorance, but is there any interesting trending or forecasting that you're seeing, like upcoming possibilities for the dark web?
Well, one thing that I featured here, actually, the infant fulls, that's pretty new. A lot of the innovation, such as it is on the dark web, is coming from the fraud trade. There's actually another trend that I think, I sound like a fashion person. A trend you can watch out for in the coming seasons is, along with tax fraud, which has been growing sort of. It's seasonal, but every season I think gets bigger. There's also a lot more trade in social media accounts. It used to be that like you would very rarely see it, like Instagram accounts being offered. Instagram accounts on the dark web are huge now, and other social media accounts have sort of grown in the same way. I think most of the innovation in that way comes from fraud and cybercrime based things. There isn't a lot of change in what gets listed in sort of the drug trade, other than just new and emerging drugs that happen in real life.
So one quick note, it is technically lunch, so we can keep going.
I'm happy to take more questions, yeah.
Just one, I don't want to hold people up from eating.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Do you feel that the lack to prosecute the fraud cases, or do you see any like improvements that can be done in that area to try and make a difference in that trend?
I think it's getting buy-in from the right agencies, basically. I think it's a lot. The agencies that prosecute drug trade have a lot clearer of a mandate, and the responsibility to prosecute for fraud is sort of spread out a little bit more. Also, with some kinds of fraud, there isn't really a clear victim, or it's difficult for the victim to know that it's hard to identify who has been harmed. So, especially with synthetic IDs, which is a growing trend, there's a difficulty in identifying exactly who the victim is in a situation, and identifying who has a responsibility to prosecute, especially when something is taking place across like multiple states or countries. That can be make it much more difficult. Honestly, I think law enforcement agencies really understand how to prosecute drugs and don't have the same interest in understanding how to prosecute other forms of crime enabled by the dark web.
You think that lies with the Secret Service?
Yeah, it does. A lot of it does lie with the Secret Service.
So my question is not asking for your legal opinion, but since you're in the space and a researcher, what, with most of this stuff being illegal, and presuming that a company wanted to do this themselves, their own brand monitoring or customer monitoring, do you sort of operate in a gray legal space? Because from being able to confirm that maybe what is being issued is legitimate.
Oh, right. Okay. So this is actually a place where my company and some other companies that operate in this sphere really differ, because there really is a lot of the law around the dark web, and especially data monitoring and data collection and data breaches, hasn't really been tested effectively. So there are like really different sort of philosophies on how you treat that. Like there are some companies that engage in the practice of buying back data, or of just buying large data sets and kind of sifting through them to see if their customers are in there. My company does not do that. We don't engage in the purchasing of data unless a customer specifically allows us to, which does limit our ability to, which does limit our research abilities in some way. We also have a policy of not, some of the really interesting forums on the dark web do require that you submit sort of either the products of crime or proof that you've committed a crime to join them, and we don't do that. So there are a lot of different legal sort of philosophies that companies can undertake. My company is very conservative, just like on that spectrum.
Somebody somehow lose a pair of crutches?
Those were there when I got here.
Okay.
Yeah, so they've been there for at least a little bit.
No, wait.
Oh.
It was just like, I obviously did not walk away.
Any more? It looks like you have a question.
Looking at Skull on there, in the bottom in caps, it's download Kick app and contact for more details. Is this a buying app or something that they get out of the web and more secure thing, or what is Kick app?
No, it's actually a conversation tool. So they're basically saying it's like I don't use Kick. I'm too old, but I think it's almost like WhatsApp or something. They're basically just saying like contact me directly for more details. I was not allowed to do this. I really wanted to, but yeah. So they're basically just saying like if you're interested in talking more about this, there's a peer-to-peer messaging app that I'll talk to you through.
Okay, so and they usually go to encrypted apps, something that will kind of.
Yeah, I mean, also there isn't really a chat feature that's super usable on Dream. So like I think a lot, and also like using any sort of messaging that's enabled through a dark web marketplace is kind of opening you up to what if that marketplace is taken over by law enforcement, which has happened multiple times. So like, so then I think the move away from that to another sort of messaging platform is kind of self-defense.
So you were talking about the infant fools?
Yes.
If you have kids, is there a way to see if like their socials have been harvested and are being used for this? Is there is there any protection that you can do for your children to make sure that somebody's not stealing their information and setting up fake IDs with it?
I would highly recommend, really for anyone, put your credit information under a credit freeze.
So can you do that for your children? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I believe they just passed a law that says you can do it for your children. For a while that was not possible, which was kind of a really terrible legal gray area or like a legal catch-22, because they were like, you have to protect your children, but only they can undergo a credit freeze, and they can only do it when they turn 18. So it's like 18 years where you're not protected. But like seriously, everyone go freeze your credit. Like you can unfreeze it when you apply for new credit, but it does prevent people from opening new credit accounts in your name. So that's just a good general rule. Having this job has made me more paranoid about the use of my information and the possibility of it being stolen, but I think that's a good general step everyone can take. Are there any more questions?
Pass it down.
Oh, there's one more.
Not that I'm gonna do this, but just out of curiosity, when people do buy physical goods such as drugs or weapons, and they do need to have it shipped, where do they have it shipped to?
I would say I know the answer, but I can't go into too much detail because that does feel like personally crossing a line and teaching you how to do something. But there are I will say there are workarounds, and there are a lot of people online who will tell you how to do it. So feel free to look into that.
And I actually have one question, and
Yeah,
I
of course.
think you may have covered this. What is the most actual terrifying thing you've seen? Not just social security numbers, like actual like bone-chilling, horrifying. Oh my God, how did they do this?
I mean, like, how did they do this? Sort of like, I haven't really encountered that. There has been like a lot of, oh God, like this is just, I guess there's two sort of avenues that you can think about. Like, a lot of the stuff around like massive data breaches, especially data breaches that contain a lot of personal, irreplaceable information about you, lifetime data, I find just really chilling in sort of a societal way. Like, oh, we're really getting backed into a corner on just like, how are we going to live our lives if so many people have compromised identities? Like, that is going to be a larger issue that we have to deal with in probably the next decade. Like, once you have this level of insecurity around so many people who have to operate, and once you have this like generation of children, many of whom had their identity stolen before they learned how to walk, like, we have to figure out how we're going to deal with that. It might mean that we move to like, we basically just get rid of socials and move to a new form of ID that hasn't been compromised. I don't really know. The other thing is, like, not to be a huge downer, there is child exploitation on the dark web, and that's like the worst thing I've ever seen. So that's my like double-barreled answer.
Talking like Criminal Minds or Law and Order SVU type child exploitation?
The stuff I saw was relatively mild. It's just really gross. Like,
that's disgusting.
Yeah. My company like does not. We basically just blacklist and send to the FBI. But it's still like it's really sad. Sorry to be a downer. Is there anyone else? I'm happy to talk more afterwards too. Thank you.